Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we are back into streaming TV with the second season of Umbrella Academy, the superhero time travel weird sci-fi show from Netflix, based on the comic of course. And then we're also off to Disney Plus for their new reboot of the popular puppet franchise Muppets Now. But before we beg Netflix for forgiveness after all the mean things I said about them last episode, Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last 2 weeks?
So I've gone back to a sitcom that's, I guess, a bit retro now, in that it's a sitcom that started in 2014, which seems like a very long time ago.
Although it is before we were doing this podcast, so the before times, I think they called them.
Yeah, exactly. When you divide human history into before MFV and MFV.
Yeah, the BMFV era.
Yeah, exactly. But also anything from like January this year seems like a million years ago as well. So it's all just the distant past, really. But yeah, I've been watching Silicon Valley, which is a Mike Judge sitcom about tech entrepreneurs, which is something that's been recommended to me by a few people saying that you'd really like this. And I'm just kind of surprised it took me this long to get around to watching it, because it is really, really funny. I'm a big fan of Mike Judge, King of the Hill, so one of my favorite sitcoms. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast. This is probably more similar to Office Space, a film he made in the 90s. I can't remember the specific year. It's probably a similar humor and approach to Office Space, which is a really great film and very funny. It's got a really good cast about this group of sort of slightly hapless coders who one of them accidentally invents a compression algorithm whilst working on a slightly pointless music app that is suddenly really, really sought after, and they sort of become overnight Silicon Valley success stories and then have to deal with actually making like a successful tech company. And there's a lot of, I don't know, jokes about tech scene, tech bros, and Silicon Valley itself. It's good. I'm surprised it took me this long to start watching it.
Yeah, no, I think I watched this. I honestly can't remember if I ever did this in an MFV recommend section or not, but I definitely have seen the first 3 seasons earlier this year or late last. And yeah, it's really good. I did notice they put it back up on Now TV actually, so I do need to now watch the other 3 seasons probably.
Yeah, I like the cast. It's obviously got a lot of people who are sort of have seen in other things. Thomas Middleton, so the main character. One person is Zach Woods, who's a sort of quite distinctive comedy actor. He's recently been in Avenue 5, the new Amanda Nucci sci-fi show.
Oh yeah, his character is great. He gets even weirder as the show goes along as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of good potential, I think, for these comedy characters to get quite silly and things like that. Every so often there's like a classic bit that I just like, that's such a Mike Judge line or such a Mike Judge thing that happens that just really makes me laugh. Kind of similar to when watching Succession, and there's like occasionally someone will say something that sounds really peep show.
Yeah, I don't have the hardcore Mike Judge fandom that you may have. I'm not even sure what else. Is it Beavis and Butthead that he's well known for?
Yeah, I did Beavis and Butthead, Daria, Office Space, King of the Hill, obviously, which you mentioned. The Good Family, which was an interesting one-series sitcom. But yeah, he obviously goes back to like early 90s stuff with like Beavis and Butthead. But yeah, he's done a lot of stuff over the years. He's always good at creating sort of quite lovable, endearing characters, even though they may be flawed or even quite silly and ridiculous. They're always like very relatable people who you kind of want to succeed. Obviously, with the quite lovable cast of characters in King of the Hill, but also in this, even though they're slightly ridiculous, self-obsessed tech entrepreneurs, you do kind of really root for them as characters and want their company to succeed.
True, although a lot of the characters I do enjoy in this show are the like parody of a parody, ludicrous tech bro characters they encounter. Like Gavin Belson, the head of the ridiculous Google analog company. I think it's Hooli.
Yeah.
He's ludicrous. I enjoy him quite a lot. And I assume you're just in like season 1 or something.
Yeah. I'm just watching my way through season 1 right now, so
okay,
no spoilers.
I will spare you the spoilers, but yeah, there's a lot of, as there are 6 seasons of this, so he does have quite a lot of opportunities to skewer all the different flavours of awful tech bro.
Yeah, the Gavin Belson character is pretty funny, sort of, I don't know, self-obsessed tech billionaire. I do like how like every single time his company's mentioned, he's always like, and this pointless app is making the world a better place. All the time, and like every time he was like, all his employees just like worship him. He's just like, it's so amazing, he's so amazing, and like 10 minutes with him would change your life. Because I did for a while work in a London-based tech startup, and there are lots of things that are very painfully familiar from the way people talk about, usually especially like tech billionaires, and kind of idolize people from like Larry Page and Steve Jobs as if they were gods. They've kind of nailed that sort of weird cultishness that the tech scene has.
Yeah, and even the more relatable, less ludicrous characters characters are still quite flawed and silly. Like a lot of sitcoms, it gets slightly sillier as it goes along, but it still starts at a fairly high baseline of it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of silliness. And there's the other tech billionaire, the one who's kind of mentoring them. And there's an episode where he discovers Burger King and just kind of spends the whole episode obsessed with all the different menu options and everything that's in Burger King. His mind's blown by this, and I don't know, it's very funny and very silly.
Yeah, and for fans of slightly more straightforward, silly jokes, there's the Ulrich Bachmann character, the ridiculous, horrible, unpleasant man whose house they all live in.
Oh yeah, he's great. Yeah,
he's just more of a straightforward sitcom monster. But
there was a good one when one of the ones I watched last night when they think they have to change the name of the company, so he goes on a vision quest to find out the new name and eats like an enormous bag of magic mushrooms. So then drives out to the desert to go on his vision quest, but then gets stuck in traffic due to there being a traffic jam, so has to do his vision quest inside a restroom of like a service station, which obviously sounds grim as fuck.
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, I enjoy that show a lot. This has mostly reminded me of it there. I need to go back and finish it.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it so far, yeah. And what's interesting is because it's from 2014, it still seems quite relevant. Weirdly, it did launch in the same year that I worked in a tech company. Coincidence? Possibly.
That was when the wheels finally dropped off the tech company fad due to Silicon Valley parodying them so beautifully.
Yeah.
Although they're still going shit.
It still seems very contemporary, and it still seems, even the first series, like I don't think the tech scene has changed a lot, and certainly the kind of people you encounter from the tech scene doesn't seem to have changed since 2014. So yeah, as you say, if it's all on Now TV, it's worth going back and watching. Nice little sort of like half-hour comedy things. You can watch like quite a few in an evening, so yeah, I'm enjoying that. Anyway, so that's what I've been up to recently. Nick, what have you been engaging with, watching, consuming?
Well, as coincidence would have it, I too have been watching a half-hour sitcom from HBO that's currently up on Now TV. I've been watching Insecure, the sitcom written by and starring Issa Rae as a character called Issa, who lives in LA and works in a charity and has a very difficult and complicated life. And it ends up being a sort of two-hander. It's about the Issa character and her friend Molly and their mutual problems with love and life and being black women in the 2010s. Yeah, it's a fairly straightforward, this is about real life sitcom, but it's very smart, it's very funny. It sometimes gets into borderline peep show territory in terms of just how bad things get, although it has a sort of comedy drama vibe in that you're also a bit more encouraged to take things seriously. Like, there's a bit more of this sort of surge of euphoria sometimes when things are actually going well for them. Whereas in Peep Show, obviously, the only way is down, as a rule. Whereas in Insecure, although they do often fuck up their lives, it's actually sometimes sad rather than funny. And they are sometimes allowed to get a break, and it is seen as, a good thing. So yeah, it's a fairly straightforward sort of person in their late 20s, early 30s has life and relationship problems sitcom. But it's very nicely done. It's got a nice sort of well-filmed premium sheen being on HBO. It's got lots of beautiful shots of Los Angeles, if you like that sort of thing. And the fact that the two lead characters are both black women is obviously a big different perspective from a lot of let's talk about life sitcoms.
Sounds interesting. I haven't actually heard of this show, but it does sound quite good. You sort of mentioned the comparison to Peep Show, so is the sense of humour that kind of cringe, oh, I can't believe someone just did that sort of humour?
Yes, although nothing is ever quite that grim. I don't think this is ever a show where they're going to have to eat a dead dog or piss in a holy ceiling or whatever else they did in Peep Show. It's just people having incredibly cringy conversations sometimes, often with men in bars, or people just wrangling themselves into unbearably stupid situations and having to explain themselves. But yeah, there's nothing quite as unbearably awful as Peep Show. It doesn't remind you of Peep Show as much as, say, Succession would remind you of Peep Show. There's usually at least one bit per episode which is just quite cringy.
Yeah, sounds good. Anyway, I do really enjoy the cringe humour. Let's just take a look at the Wikipedia page, and it seems like it possibly began life or was based on a web series or like a sort of YouTube series.
Yeah, a web series I have not seen. I don't think it's a direct continuation or anything. We started watching it because my partner likes the web series, and she has not pointed out any like direct crossovers or continuations or in-jokes. It's possible that that's because it was so long ago when she watched the web series that she's forgotten. Yeah, I think she came to prominence as part of this web show that she did on Kickstarter, or possibly YouTube, and then I think she kickstarted a second series or something, and then she got this new series with HBO about her slightly older self living the high life in LA. Well, the high life, she works at a small charity which is a charity which is meant to be, it's called We Got Y'all, and it's a charity that's aimed at helping out disadvantaged inner city children, often kids of colour, but she's the only non-white employee, or certainly the only black employee. At one point they hire an Asian person, but yeah, it's yeah, she's the only black employee, and basically they'd spent the entire life either being treated as the sole representative of every single person of colour in the world, or just sitting there and looking quietly sad as they make increasingly humiliating decisions.
It sounds quite contemporary. They're engaging
Yeah.
with things like white saviour complexes and things like that, and tokenism.
Yeah, among the things they would occasionally gently make fun of, there is, the well-meaning white people she works with. Yeah, it is very contemporary. It is very much trying to engage with how things are nowadays. Maybe it's the sort of thing which will, as a result, age terribly. Who knows what this will look like in 10, 20 years. But yeah, as a thing to watch right now, because it is a contemporary show. It is still going. I think season 4 aired this year, and we're just coming to the end of season 3. So yeah, it is very much trying to talk about current things. Like, it gets in with the relevant Donald Trump jokes at the start of season 2.
I do enjoy a show that's like sort of contemporary as something to say about right now. So yeah, and a lot of these shows, they kind of become a marker of like a point in history. And I was just thinking kind of like sitcoms like Citizen Smith, for example, that certainly summed up the kind of politics of a place and are still funny today, but also kind of also preserve the past as like a sort of historical document.
It's clearly just their current statement of what it's like to be a black woman in America now. And yeah, it's very evocative. It's very much an opportunity to cringe along with them a lot of the time. So yeah, good show. Again, it's all on Now TV, although admittedly I think it might be down to its last 10, 20 days, so you might have to somewhat slam it if anyone listening to this wants to rush to Now TV and watch it. So...
Next up, this episode, we will be reviewing the second series of Umbrella Academy on Netflix, which is based on the comic written by My Chemical Romance singer Gerard Way and illustrated by Gabriel Ba. The second series begins with the Hargreaves family arriving in Dallas, Texas, but at different time points in the early 1960s. They must find each other, deal with their personal traumas from the first series, and stop another apocalypse that's been organised by a group of mysterious time travellers known as the Commission. So we've seen the entire second series, so I'll start by asking Nick, how did it compare to the first series?
Well, once again, Alistair has slammed the entire show, so has seen the previous season much more recently than I have. But yeah, I think this was a pretty big improvement on the first season, because my memory of season 1 is basically it started fairly strong, and the last episode was pretty good, but there's a long period around the sort of middle to late middle, about episode 6 to 8 basically, where I was a bit sort of, this is quite slow, quite boring, and it feels like you're just running on the spot. And yeah, I thought this was a bit better paced. I think mostly they've got this vibe they seem to want, this sort of character-driven hangout vibe, which just hires some very good actors to play a group of charismatic fuck-ups, and then just sort of leans heavily on the fact that they've got good chemistry and we enjoy spending time with them, and kind of focuses on that over the, anything that might resemble a plot. Or at least the plot is very much just this sort of background skeleton to spend time with the Hargreaves characters. And yeah, I think by leaning a lot harder on that in season 2 and spending most of the season just focusing on the hangout fun and giving the characters things to react to and things to do, but not really driving them along a particular plot that hard, I think this ended up being a lot more entertaining. If anything, I think, yeah, again, it's became a bit more baggy and slightly weird in the last 2 or 3 episodes when they had to start really going down a plot again. There's a weird anticlimax bit towards the end where they just have to walk down a corridor or something. I don't know. It seems a bit weird and sort of like even they don't entirely know how to end this season. But the characterization is a lot better and more entertaining this year. There were a few characters last year who felt very badly served, or like they just didn't quite know what to do with them. And this year, all the main siblings have a very defined plot. The actors seem to have really become quite comfortable with the role. They've maybe adjusted some of the characters a bit to make them fit this funny hangout vibe a bit more. And yeah, I thought this was a lot more entertaining.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that pretty much. Yeah, I thought the second series was an improvement on the first. I watched the first series just before watching the second series because I didn't watch it when it came out for whatever reason, partly because there's just so much TV to get through. And I did feel the second series was just kind of more entertaining, seemed better paced, had a better balance of the main characters. The appeal of the show is the core group of Hargreaves siblings and the sort of the relationships between them and the stories they get into, which I'm glad there was more of that in the second series because, yeah, they've got a really interesting cast of characters and a good range of actors acting them. And I like the fact that in the second series they moved it to the 1960s, which was quite interesting. They brought in various bits of history, which I quite liked. The Kennedy assassination. I thought they handled the civil rights stuff really well, with the character Allison becoming involved with the civil rights movement in Dallas in the early 1960s, which was interesting and had some very tense scenes to it. So there was a lot to like about the second series over the first series. I've got a few flaws. I don't know if we want to necessarily dive into them all right now, but I do think the plot had quite a few holes in it. I'm not really sure why the Commission wanted to create an apocalypse, like, again.
Was it the Commission creating the apocalypse? I thought the apocalypse happened because of Vanya, again, sort of.
There seems to be implied that the Commission wanted the apocalypse to happen, or insisted that it happened, and was trying to stop them stopping the apocalypse. Although it wasn't really sure why, or really. And if I possibly completely misunderstood the plot, then that's also an implicit criticism of the show. And also, kind of, I did feel it was a bit like stopping an apocalypse was the plot of the first series, and kind of doing that again seemed a bit, I don't know, almost anticlimactic. It's a bit like, I've seen this. There's like 6 days to stop the apocalypse. I kind of wish they had some other arc plot.
Yeah, I think the big problem at times was that because a lot of this is built around mysterious plans or mysterious schemes, especially the mysterious schemes of, the Commission or the Handler. And to be honest, that was my big criticisms by the end of the last couple of episodes. It's a bit unclear exactly what she's doing and how she's trying to achieve it. Like, was she going to let the apocalypse go ahead? Or did she always want to end up fighting the Umbrella Academy on a farm? It's not really... It's a bit strange, and I think even by time travel standards, the plot is a bit strange.
Yeah.
And strange in a, don't know if this makes as much sense as you think it does way, rather than a, this is intentionally weird way. Although it is also a show that is sort of trying to do intentional weirdness.
Yeah, I do like the sort of style of the show, which is good, how it's got a sort of visual flair to it, which is, I think, one of the things that kind of distinguishes it from being, another Netflix superhero sort of comic adaptation show. I mean, there's an interesting cast of characters, but I suppose like the former superheroes who are now kind of fuck-ups isn't amazing, the original territory, but what kind of distinguishes this show, makes it interesting, is really interesting characters and the good cast they've got to play them, but also this sort of slightly odd aesthetic the show has, this sort of sense of reality turned up a notch, usually a lot of really interesting visuals, something slightly strange going on, like one of the villains is a sort of a fish in a tank that kind of walks around on top of a man in a suit, which is just kind of delightfully bizarre. And there's quite a lot of music in each episode, pop songs thrown in and things like that, so I did like the aesthetic of the show.
Yeah, I think if anything they kind of moved away from the superhero thing a bit this year. Like, it wasn't really mentioned, they didn't really have any of those little flashbacks to them wearing tiny Robin masks. I don't know, last year it sometimes felt a bit arch, a bit like they were trying a bit too hard to play off this sort of wacky melange of genres. Like, although it's still quite heightened and quite frantic and quite sort of, here's a silly fight scene, here's a high concept time travel sequence, I think possibly Series 1 also had this sort of gothic mansion thing going on and this sort of superhero stuff going on. And I think it has benefited slightly from being pared down a little bit to just the fuck-ups in the 60s with a little bit of this time travel stuff on the side. The bits that are actually essential to the plot. Whereas season 1, I don't know, it sometimes seems like, I don't know, maybe it spent a bit too much time being pleased with itself for combining so many genres and a bit less time actually doing, a story. So honestly, I think the superhero stuff has kind of gone away, and but they've still got the sort of high-speed Guardians of the Galaxy style, slightly silly fights set to pop songs, which is an aesthetic I still enjoy, much as it is increasingly becoming quite dominant in a lot of pop culture. I still like it when it's well done. There's some particularly fun sequences with the Five character, the teleporting kid, zapping around, punching about 7 people at once, which are always very, very fun to watch.
Yeah, they do a good fight montage. It's one of the things I like about the show. Certainly the kind of the teleporting fighting sequences are quite good. They do a good action scene, and they seem to have also like enough budget to make the kind of special effects look convincing. It's a weird thing. I kind of liked the aesthetic that they go for in the show, and like the music is very much a part of it. But I really didn't like the actual music itself. I kind of like the fact like you say, like Guardians of the Galaxy weaving songs into the show. I just really felt that sometimes the songs they chose just massively did not suit the scene, which was kind of odd. And also, I just think a lot of the time that the music they chose was just quite bad. Like, there's this like awful cover of Bad Guy they use at one point, and it's like there's loads of kind of crappy American indie. It's kind of like, I always feel like it's almost like whoever has done the music for the show is someone who basically thinks like Bare Naked Ladies and U2 are like the best things ever, although I don't think there's actually any of those two bands in there. But I really felt that, like, although I appreciate their choice in music, I appreciate them using music in the way they did, I just think they've got terrible taste in music.
Yeah, one of the biggest criticisms a lot of people had of the first season, and it's not an invalid criticism, there's a sort of big climactic romantic dance scene between Luther and Allison at one point, and it's played out to Top Loader's Dancing in the Moonlight, which is famously not a great song, or at least famously a bit of a basic song. Yeah. And I don't know, I think you're right. I think the show that this is trying to be, the sort of the sense of coolness that they want to project, the sense that this is all really cool, isn't it? It's not suited by using songs like Dancing in the Moonlight. I'm pretty sure that Gerard Way was bombarded on social media by people asking him if he was really a big fan of Dancing in the Moonlight. after that show aired. I'm pretty sure Gerard Way has very little to do with the day-to-day on this show, and I don't think he's a big fan of Dancing in the Moonlight.
No, I can't imagine he's a fan of Top Loader. It's also, I mean, obviously that song is shit, but other than the fact that song is shit, it's just so literal. It's like they're dancing in the moonlight, and you've got a song that says dancing in the moonlight. Like, what is that song adding to this scene, other than pointing out the blindingly obvious?
Yeah, but there's a famously quite well-done sequence in, I think, the first episode with the kids all dancing sort of alone together.
Yeah, I think we're alone now. Yeah, that was all right.
That was all right. That wasn't bad. But yeah, I think that's become, if there is an iconic scene in this show, that's probably it. But yeah, I think there are other music choices that clang a little. But yeah, anyway, back in season 2. Although there was a weird scene set to Backstreet's Back, which on the one hand I quite enjoyed the way they called that in, with Benning Klaus's body quoting it. But on the other hand, it was a weird choice for that fight scene.
Yeah, but although that sort of worked because there was almost like a sense of irony to it, or it was deliberately not suited to the scene or not suited to the aesthetic they were going for, which kind of added an element of irony or humour. And the show does have some good jokes in it and a good sense of humour, so that kind of worked. It's because they weren't deliberately trying to be cool, but they were trying to be a bit silly, which is good. There's nothing less cool than someone trying to be cool with like a horrendous cover of Bad Guy.
But yeah, no, season 2 was fun. I mean, maybe there were like hardcore, serious Umbrella Academy fans who are annoyed that they've made it a bit sillier. Like, I think Luther and Diego, especially, between season 1 and 2, I mean, you might have got this more as someone who watched them both recently, became slightly sillier, more the butt of the joke as characters, as sort of the big, well-meaning straight man and the overly self-serious superhero man.
Yeah, they definitely, for Diego, they kind of dialed down the Batman-iness, is how I would put it. Like in the first series, I think you're supposed to take you more seriously as a brooding kind of, I've been through some shit and I'm dark. You're supposed to take that a bit more seriously. When the second series, it's played more for laughs.
Yeah, doesn't 5 introduce you to someone by saying, imagine Batman, but lower your expectations?
Yeah, which is one of the all-time great one-liners from the series. Yeah, and I see what they're going with Luther in the first series. That like his story is quite sad, and he's like sort of congenitally incapable of standing up to his father, who is like quite awful, and that is quite sad. But I don't know. I just felt it just didn't really pay off so well in the first series. But anyway, we should start reviewing the first series. But in the second series, even though there was maybe a bit less of the sadness, the moment when he actually stood up to his father in the second series is kind of quite powerful, or at least it kind of shows a sort of character progression, which I felt worked better than what they were doing to character in the first series.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Luther doesn't really get one of the bigger, more substantially emotional journeys in this series, but still, he is, I think, coming into his own in a very small way. And the fact that he's been kind of silly this season, honestly, almost made him feel a bit more relatable than last season when he spent a lot of the time sulking.
Yeah.
And of course, Vanya gets an actual in-story mind wipe to explain any slight changes in her personality.
And I liked Vanya's plot in this series when she's sort of a carer for an autistic child on a farm and ends up falling in love with the mistress of the household. And I thought that worked well in that it was quite a sweet little story actually, and again quite sad. It was one of those moments when I think bringing in a lot of the politics and social fabric of the 1960s made the show feel like a bit more real, a bit more believable. That like it is kind of really sad how Vanya has met this woman and fallen in love and they want to be together, but they can't because it's 1963 and LGBT people don't really get to have happy endings in 1963, at least not many of them, because of how homophobic society was. And similarly to the way they handled civil rights, there are various scenes when Allison, being a woman of colour in Texas in the early 60s, feels very genuinely threatened and quite scary. So kind of bringing that stuff in really hyped up the tension, I felt, and worked very well.
Yeah, I think sometimes in season 1 it did, if anything, feel so weightless because, again, seemingly everything they evoked was a pop culture trope, and it just got a bit, I don't know. Even though I've talked a lot about this show being a bit sillier this year and a bit more focused on this sort of fun hangout vibe, a lot of it is this, as well as doing jokes, a lot of it is this sort of more human storytelling where it is just people spending time in an environment rather than people reacting to, I don't know, oh look, it's Cthulhu or something.
Yeah.
And also there was a good bit where they think Vanya's a Russian agent just because she's called Vanya.
Yeah,
So,
which is...
Again, a less socially conscious but still quite fun use of the period.
Yeah, to be honest, I can imagine that is probably the sort of thing that went down. Slightly less intellectually gifted Texas cops in the 1960s. I did like the 1960s stuff, and I thought it added something to this. I think you kind of nailed it when you said it seemed kind of weightless in the first series. It felt more grounded to have this sort of 60s setting, which I did like. I thought they handled things like civil rights very well. They did a diner sit-in, is where Allison gets involved in. I was worried they would do something like Luther would come in and save them at the end, and but they didn't do like a white savior thing, and they did handle the civil rights stuff very well. I did feel that actually they kind of got a lot of the 60s wrong, which sort of hankered with me, mainly by throwing in loads of stuff that's from the future. Like, although I did like Klaus's hippie cult, that New Age spiritualism is very much a late 60s thing, not really a thing in 1963. You could get away by arguing like, oh, he created that, which sort of okay you get away with, but there's a lot of like his love interest from the first series who's young in 1960s joining the military and going to Vietnam. It's really too early for that sort of thing. I actually looked this up because it confused me so much. There were only 16,000 US troops in Vietnam in 1963. It was way before the huge expansion of American military forces, which was under the next president, Lyndon B. Johnson. And there's even a bit when Klaus's sort of lover is arguing with him, or his future lover is arguing with him, and he says something like, oh, you peace-loving hippies don't get it, or something like that. And I was like, that hippie versus non-hippie kind of conflict is really a late 60s thing. Although there were people opposed to the war at that point, it was not the kind of hot-button social issue it became. Like I say, in the early 60s, civil rights and things like that was much more of the focus. And it's really before the kind of Vietnam and the kind of American cultural stuff really got heated up. A lot of all that is just late 60s.
Obviously, I didn't notice any of that, and I'm sure you're right. Wasn't the point that he joined the army earlier than he would have done because of Klaus turning up?
Yeah, but he says that what Klaus says to him is that you joined the army because Kennedy was assassinated.
Well, I guess he doesn't say when he does it, but yeah.
In this, he joins up before. And obviously people should join the army, and I suppose it makes sense that he's a volunteer to Vietnam rather than a draftee, because this is before the draft. And also for the sort of character he is, he's a sort of person who volunteers to join the army, not gets drafted. But I just felt that like it's one of the things people forget, that what we think of as the 1960s is really kind of 65, 66 to mid 1970s. Like it takes a while for the 60s to get going, and like all the big flash things like Vietnam, even like the kind of civil rights stuff becomes much more intense later on. But I can kind of understand how they wanted to get it all in and anchor it around the Kennedy assassination. But to me, as someone who knows that period quite well, and obviously recently watched the Vietnam documentary, it did feel a bit incongruous, and I don't know, but there's a degree to which you maybe take it too seriously. But.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm sure you're right. It didn't bother me because I didn't know nothing about these things.
But I did like the plotline with Klaus starting a cult is very funny, and like there's some great jokes, and how he would use like a TLC lyric or something like that at some point, which sounds really, really deep when said like kind of in a messiahly voice.
Kind of similar to what I said a few weeks ago about Matthew McFadden in Succession. I really liked Robert Sheehan in Misfits back in the day, the first 2 seasons, I think. And yeah, I've basically been waiting for him to pop back up in something else I watch and really give another one of these big, broad, silly performances again. And yeah, his performance in Umbrella Academy, especially the second season, is very much doing that for me.
He was definitely one of the sort of highlights of the first series, and was very, very good in this series. Although, again, I seem to have written down quite a lot of things I didn't like about the second series, and overall, I must say I did like it and thought, it was good and certainly improved in the first series. But what I did like about the Klaus character is that I did feel there's a bit of like kind of a self-hating gay man with substance abuse problems. I do feel sometimes is veering into the cliche. Some of the better moments of Klaus is more actually when he's not doing that, when he's sort of relating to other people, to the other characters, some of the better moments with him. And I think there is an element that it didn't seem like a quite very contemporary depiction of LGBTQ plus people, in that the character Klaus is quite obviously queer coded, but he does seem to suffer more than the other characters, like kind of emotionally, like sort of tormented by his drug use, and also the kind of the death of Ben and things like that. I did feel that's a bit, I don't know, of a cliche of the kind of the gay character is the one that seems to suffer the most, certainly suffer the most emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, I'm trying to remember the comics now, I think a lot of this is partly them just leaning into the fact that Robert Sheehan does this sort of big dramatic fuck up stuff very well, and they've clearly decided to lean very heavily into that, because I mean, you've got him, why wouldn't you?
And I think he's really good in the part, and I really liked his performance, and yeah, he really kind of elevated the character. So I'm not saying it's terrible, I'm just saying interesting, maybe he goes in a slightly different direction in the third series, maybe because now he's off the drugs and has maybe dealt with some of his trauma. It'd be interesting if they took the character in a slightly different direction. And what they have achieved in the second series is kind of making it fresh and interesting by setting it in the past. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with the third series to find a way to make it again fresh and interesting.
Yeah, they haven't actually renewed it for that third season, but it seems to have, I don't know, caught on pretty heavily. Like a lot of Netflix shows seem to sort of vanish with season 2, but everyone seems to be watching it still. So yeah, I'm assuming they'll commission that third series. I hope so. Oh, and Aidan Gallagher as 5 is extremely good. Like, maybe it's slightly unfair of me to positively judge him on his age, but yeah, especially considering the fact that he is actually 15, 16 when he was doing this the first 2 seasons. He's amazingly charismatic and often comes close to acting the adult actors off the screen. It's very good.
Yeah, no, he's excellent. At first I was so impressed with him. I thought, like, have they got a grown up and digitally de-aged him, or like shrunk him somehow, or like find someone who is like much older?
I honestly assumed it was just another, 20-something playing young, but no, he actually is a teenager. Fair enough, he's brilliant.
No, he is absolutely great for what is a difficult character to do. Can be both funny and menacing.
Well, yeah, and the fact that he does pull off the sort of late 50s man in a teenage body. In a way, it's almost hard to actually describe and define, but yeah, he is just incredibly good at this sort of awkward, jaded character.
Yeah, possibly one of the best episodes in the second series is when he meets his younger, ironically older self, which in itself is hilarious. And obviously there's a problem because when you meet yourself in the past, your well-established science fiction trope of sort of temporal paradoxes being caused by meeting yourself in the past. But in this show, the side effects are things like unbearable itching, like urination, paranoia, and homicidal rage. And I don't know, just as he goes through these 7, and there's several others as well, he lays them out quite clearly at the beginning of the episode, as he goes through the 7 stages of time travel madness. It is just, I don't know, all I can say is it's hilarious. So it's worth watching for that one episode.
Actually, the bit I quite liked about that was the beat where 5 has to deal with the fact that Luther is like very inclined to defer to this sort of older man version of 5 because of his daddy issues. But the teenage 5 has to explain that really he should actually defer to him because even though he looks like a 16-year-old, he's actually older.
Yeah.
And Luther just stands there looking completely confused. It's great.
The Luther number 5 double act is very, very good. Partly, yeah, because like the massively tall person, the massively short person, is just kind of, there's an inherent sort of, their physical proportions are so mismatched, it kind of brings to mind so much kind of slapstick comedy like Laurel and Hardy and things like that is a good, it just seems almost inherently hilarious.
Yeah, and last episode I made a few snide remarks about the slack plotting in Netflix shows. Again, so sorry. Please keep sending the money. But yeah, I should probably mention that there is some of that here. Sorry. I think they dealt with the plotting a bit by just throwing in a lot more character stuff and making it more entertaining. But there's definitely still a sense of has a slight sense of the chopped up movie. Like, this could have easily been a 2.5 hour movie if they just shoved everything together and pulled out a lot of the tangents and maybe a couple of the characters. But yeah, I think it does feel a very sort of Netflix TV vibe. But on the other hand, as I say, the new version kind of works for me. So to be honest, they just needed to straighten out the plot at the end and I'd be more or less fine.
Yeah, they're definitely the perennial Netflix criticism of there's probably not enough plot for 10 episodes. But yeah, there's just about enough style for 10 episodes, I would say. And there's a lot of character stuff. I mean, in this show, because they all get scattered throughout the 60s, and then they all arrive at different points in the early 60s, and then they pick up the plot in 1963 when 5 arrives, who's the latest in the chronology to arrive. So all the other characters have kind of been there for a while and have kind of all got themselves sort of settled domestically to varying degrees. And it's quite nice just to see each character in their kind of environment and what they've done and a little bit about the life they've built for themselves. Like Alison gets married, and involved in civil rights. They say Vanya is secretly in love with this woman and is a kind of carer for a child. Luther's become a sort of a boxer for a mobster. I'm not going to go through them all, but it's nice to see them all in that kind of their own little environs. And I kind of feel like each one could almost be like a little show in itself, or a little sitcom about this crazy guy who runs a cult, or this show about a guy who's like a boxer. You kind of, each one's got this kind of little story in itself that kind of resolves, which is what stops the whole thing feeling like it's just slow and overly padded.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of glad that they were, starting to get back together by the second or third episode. I was a bit concerned we were going to have, full Netflix plotting and the cast wouldn't start being in the same place till about episode 5.
Yeah, I was worried about that, which fortunately that was an unfounded concern.
So yeah, I felt they really found their feet in season 2. Well done.
Yeah, I would recommend this, yeah. Yeah, and I think someone asked me on Twitter if I would recommend watching it, and I said, yeah, I would recommend it, especially it's worth sticking into the second series. Next up, we'll be reviewing Muppets Now, a new show on Disney+. This is a sketch show that spoofs YouTube channels such as Miss Piggy hosting a lifestyle show and the Swedish Chef hosting a cooking show, riffing on various themes that if you're familiar from if you spent time on the internet or YouTube or things like that. So we've seen the first 3 episodes of this new series. So Nick, what did you think of it?
Can you review this? I mean, I'll give it a go. I think I quite enjoy this. It's very fun. It's very it's very silly in a sort of fun, throwaway way. They've definitely done a good job of, sticking the Muppets in these formats, which are sort of, as you say, a sort of melange of TV formats and YouTube formats. The continuity of, it's our new Disney streaming show is how it's presented. They're uploading the shows, the segments for the new Disney streaming show. But as you say, what they've clearly actually done is made YouTube clips. The continuity is a bit confusing, but again, what kind of dickhead would spend 20 minutes untangling the continuity of the new Muppets sketch show? But yeah, it's always reliable fun. I would possibly not recommend binging it because I think it would probably get a bit repetitive. It seems to be mostly the same 4 or 5 segments. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that over the course of the remaining, I think there are 3 episodes, I think it's a 6-episode season, they will introduce at least 1 or 2 new segment types. Because already after 3 episodes, I'm getting the worrying feeling I might have seen everything. But yeah, it is good, breaks up the day fun. I particularly enjoy the Swedish chef, who has long been a favourite and is definitely one of the best bits in this, with his weird cooking challenge show where he inevitably gets pissy with his guests and brings in stupid puns. But yeah, there's nothing I'm yet, aggressively sick of. I don't know if I'd rush out and get Disney Plus for it, but if you've already got Disney Plus and starting to wonder if you're getting enough use out of it, then yeah, this is a fun way to spend half an hour.
I'm enjoying it as well. They're releasing the episodes weekly, so it's unlike something that unlike Umbrella Academy, which drops all at once. And they come out on Fridays, so I'd be sort of watching one after work each Friday, which is quite a nice sort of end of the week ritual, which I think is a good way to enjoy the show rather than necessarily binging it in one go, because there are sort of the same sketches each week. But I'm finding it very, very funny as a sort of long-term fan of the Muppets. They did a show a couple of years ago, just another version of their Muppets Tonight, which was like slightly more modern. They brought in like their smartphones and things like that. There's a few new characters, but it was very much like kind of the same sort of Muppets TV show they normally do, but just kind of a bit more contemporary, whereas this feels like something of a progression in that they are actually changing the format up and kind of spoofing, sort of YouTube segments and things like that. Does make it seem like a bit more fresh than original than just doing kind of like another version of Muppets Tonight.
Yeah, I can appreciate the attempts to do some modern parody. Yeah, it definitely brings the Muppets into the now. Oh wait, hang on, they've done that in the name, rather than just as you say, recycling stuff. Honestly, you sit down to watch this and you almost don't quite realise how many characters you already know and like who are actually Muppets. Like when, in the 3rd episode, Stadler and Waldorf turn up as a sort of test focus group. I'm not as big a Muppet fan as Alistair. My biggest Muppet fandom is probably the regular viewing of Muppets Christmas Carol, which I still do basically every year. Still love that film. Still cry when the 3rd ghost turns up. Actually, that's a good point. Where's the rat?
Yeah, Rizzo. He's not appeared yet. There was a bit. They had some rats on the lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, but and also like they haven't actually used that many of the really established Muppets. Like, there's not been much of Fozzie Bear.
Gonzo was only in one tiny bit.
Yeah, although it's possible to be saving them for future episodes. But yeah, there's not been much Gonzo as well, or even that much Kermit. Although I did really like in the 1st episode, the bit when he teaches people how to photobomb is very funny.
Oh yeah, that was good. Yeah, it's weird actually. There was almost no Kermit at all in episode 3. How odd.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess if they're rotating the characters around a bit. It is slightly different how they're using slightly different Muppets.
But yeah, it's a Muppet show. It makes the Muppets seem contemporary. It's got I like the silly funny game show bit with Pepe the King Prawn, but maybe starting to find the Miss Piggy's lifestyle show bit slightly repetitive. But what can you do?
Yeah, it is kind of similar in each episode and things like that. But they always have the same celebrity guests of Linda Cardellini and
Taye Diggs.
Taye Diggs, I forgot the guy's name. Yeah. I do also like the Professor Bunsen and Beaker's like science stroke exploding show, which is kind of spoofing things like Mythbusters or whatever. Or I'm sure there's a whole generation now of YouTubers who've kind of picked up this mantle of like setting fire to things and blowing things up in car parks just for your entertainment.
Yeah, I quite enjoy that. But that's one of these segments where I come away thinking I feel like it maybe needs to be slightly funnier. Like I feel like I don't know. Maybe that's just a segment for other people. But yeah, I always come away thinking, okay, where's the really big payoff?
Yeah, that's what you mean. It doesn't necessarily build to a really big epic joke at the end of the sketch that you want.
Although having said that, the thing with Beaker and his electronic replacement in that one was pretty good. Beaker.
Yeah, which is sort of a Alexa type thing. It's still sort of the kind of continuity they have with things like Muppets Tonight, with having like celebrity guests, but updating it to be contemporary celebrity guests. Like they've had Danny Trejo on, they've had RuPaul.
Yeah, I guess the thing with the Muppets is they're not going to be properly savage, are they? You don't come onto Muppets to be like humiliated.
No, but I think Danny Trejo is an interesting choice. I mean, I know that he's obviously a very well-established actor now and a restaurateur, which I didn't know. but he was a gangster before he was an actor. He was, I think, actually like an enforcer for the Mexican cartel, and he is quite a scary guy. And now he's like on with Muppets. It is, I don't know. I found that just intrinsically hilarious itself.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that primarily because they didn't bring it up during his Muppet appearance.
Funny enough, they didn't mention
Yeah.
that he was an actual gangster. He's a really cool guy, Danny Trejo. I think actually he does a lot of work in prisons with gangsters now, kind of helping them reform, because he's a sort of reformed gangster. And he's very successful. He had his own film franchise and has obviously been in a lot of films, including things like Heat, which we did cover in the podcast. He's in Breaking Bad as well. He's done a lot of big name TV and stuff. Although he was also in the Spy Kids films, so he's not all tough man, ultra violence.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he turned up playing a funny time-travelling man who disapproved of his daughter's relationship with someone in The Flash. So yeah, he's very much gone full mainstream at this point.
He's a character actor, I'd say. He plays tough guys.
Yeah, sort of disapproving dad tough guy in that one, yeah.
It's always good doing these things when they get celebrities, because a lot of the celebrities are quite contemporary people who I'm not necessarily familiar with. Like, I don't think I've seen a show with Linda Cardinelli in it, but when it's someone I do know whose like film career I've been following for a while, like Danny Trejo, it does make you feel very much like you're in on the joke.
Yeah, whereas conversely, the third guest they had on the Swedish Chef show, who I assume is a contemporary chef, is someone I've just never heard of. Not that I'm ever pretend to be down with the American cooking scene, so it's probably not that big a surprise.
My partner, who I watched the show with, did recognise him. He's one of the kind of, I think, big entrepreneurs who launched the food van revolution of sort of street food. And I think the film Chef is sort of partly inspired by him and kind of inspired by his life, although it's not, I think, an actual biopic. I think he does a Netflix TV show about cooking with Jon Favreau, who directed Chef and stars in it as well. So I hadn't heard of him, but yeah, my partner, who's more into cooking shows and stuff, recognised him. So yeah.
Linda Cardellini played Hawkeye's wife on Avengers, which, to be fair, isn't the most visible role in the world, but
To be fair, it's Avengers. It's pretty top tier.
So yeah, it's a fun sort of light entertainment show. It's a weird thing to cover critically, I guess. To be honest, it's probably the closest to non-fictional TV I've watched in months, so, it's good to see me mix it up a bit.
Yeah, as someone who's always loved the Muppets, and it's one of those things that takes you back to my childhood. Yeah, I find this really funny, and it's still consistently funny, and it's got the humour that I like. So yeah, I mean, it's nice. They're like 20 minutes long. Especially as they come out on Friday, finish work, crack a beer, bit of Muppets, make a curry. Adulthood during lockdown. This is part of my lockdown experience.
Yeah, we'll look back in 2020 and the main thing we'll think is, Muppets. Okay, thanks very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com and see more episodes of said podcast, along with articles and other content by mostly Alistair. And if you've really, really enjoyed this podcast, why not go to your podcast receiving machine of choice, especially iTunes, if you like that, and leave us a nice review so that other people can join you. You can also find us on Twitter, where we are at MFV Podcast, and you can also find us on Facebook, where we're at facebook.com/Moderate Fantasy Violence. And if you want more from me, you can find me on Twitter at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. And if you want more from me, you can go to NickMB on Twitter, or you can find my website at nickbryan.com. And especially, I am currently warming up for my first comics Kickstarter, which will be starting at the beginning of September. So I believe we'll be live by the time the next episode of this podcast goes up, which is gently terrifying. So yeah, and there should, theoretically, if I've got it all right, be a page that lets you bookmark it to come back to and back when it starts, as of when this episode goes out, and you should be able to find that either, I'll mention it in the show notes for this episode, or you can go to my Twitter at NickMB, or I'll probably, let's face it, retweet it into the Moderate Fantasy Violence feed. So yeah, if you want to get a notification when it starts and, add to the number of people who are doing that, which will make me feel better about the whole enterprise, then why not? I recommend. And meanwhile, back in the far more important world of what we're covering on this podcast, we'll be back, of course, in 2 weeks with our next episode, in which we are going full Netflix. We're going to cover them until they forgive us, with their new Transformers anime, War for Cybertron, and their new superhero film, Project Power. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's all, folks.
Yep, that'll do. Maybe you can't really review that.